Thank you. And I think we want to turn this off so we don't have feedback. So thank you for having me. How many of you are here to see me for the first time? Never heard me speak before? Wow, that's terrific. How many of you watch me on YouTube? And wonderful. All right. So I put out a lot of free content on YouTube and through a newsletter. And you can sign up for my YouTube channel and newsletter. I brought some sheets if you're not currently a subscriber. And you can get a college education in a few minutes a day, 3 days a week through those vehicles. All right? Is there feedback? Yeah. So we have to fix that, I think, because I'll go out of my mind if we last this way for 2 hours. But I'm assuming they're doing something about that in the back. All right, so anyway, one thing I want to say, and my talk is sort of geared in this direction, is my company specializes in something called informed medical decision making. How many of you know what that really means? Anybody? Let me explain it to you from our perspective, my perspective. I want you to think about the way that you buy cars, houses, college educations for your kids, blenders, washing machines, and retirement accounts. How many of you bought at least some of those things? And keep your hand up if you're not an expert in the things that you bought. Okay, so I'm not a real estate agent, but I managed to buy houses and live in them for a long time. How did I do that? By asking questions, doing my own research, looking carefully, deliberating about what I was going to do, and then making the best decision that I thought I could make at the time. How many of you have been through that similar process? Okay. Has anybody bought a house this way? You get in the car with a real estate agent and you say, listen, I'm looking for a real estate guru. I'm too stupid to understand real estate, so just tell me where you want me to live. Anybody ever bought a house that way? Probably not. And in my entire time on this earth, I've never said to somebody, boy, what a nice car you have. And they said, well, personally, I don't like it, but it's the one the car salesman said I had to buy, right? I've never heard that statement before. But here's what happens, and this is why it's so important to talk about this. When people show up in a doctor's office, or they're talking to their neighbor about how to eat, they go brain dead on the buying skills. Have you ever noticed this? I'll ask people, why'd you end up doing a ketogenic diet? And they'll say, my neighbor told me. Okay. And why are you taking this supplement? Oh, my cousin sells it. All right, that's a good reason, all right? And why did you decide to have this test or this drug, take this drug, whatever? Well, my doctor told me to do it. And so if we could teach people, if we could teach everybody, if I could wave a magic wand, this is what I would do, to practice informed decision-making, the way that we buy houses and cars and blenders and washing machines, if we would buy healthcare that way, the bill would be cut to 1/3 of what it is today. And the healthcare system as we know it would be gone. It couldn't exist anymore. Wouldn't that be a great thing? Yeah. And then I would no longer spend every afternoon in my office hearing a statement that just makes my heart hurt. And it goes something like this. Well, if I'd known then what I know now, I never would have done, I wouldn't have eaten a keto diet. I wouldn't have taken this supplement. I wouldn't have blown out my kidneys. I wouldn't have agreed to this procedure. And I certainly wouldn't have had this test. So I guess what you could say is what we're promoting is no regret medicine, where you do the deliberating before rather than after. And that's essentially what we do. So I picked this topic when I was talking to Steve last year about this conference. I try to pick topics other people aren't talking about and that I think have widespread appeal. Now, obviously, when we're talking about sports nutrition, I'm assuming that you're not here because you're going to try to get into the Olympic trials this year, right? That's not why you all came. Why is this topic important? It's because everybody who's here has a child or a grandchild or a brother or somebody in your life who's working out at a gym or playing high school football and being told to eat a high-protein diet, right? Or being told to take supplements, or that everybody needs to drink sports drinks. And as much confusion as there is about diet just in the general public, I think it's on steroids with sports nutrition. So I termed it sports and exercise nutrition because we want to appeal to everybody, including people who are just trying to get the most out of their workouts. Ah, it worked, great. All right, so I'll just give you some background. I love medical history. And one of the reasons is because it informs us as to what some of the issues are that we've never resolved and that sort of thing. So I like to talk about medical history. So by way of background, optimal nutrition is something that's been talked about since back in the days of Hippocrates, believe it or not. From the time of the ancient Olympics, there was discussion about the right diet and some of the things that they were writing about back then. And you can see the early seeds of confusion. So we've got people saying the secret to athletic performance is animal foods. So you want to eat a lot of oxen, goat, bull, and deer. No, it's not that. It's moist cheeses and wheat and dried figs. No, it's really liquor and special potions. I've always wanted to see the people who are doing Olympic events on alcohol. That would be sort of interesting to see. But if you look at some of the articles that were written at the time of the Berlin Olympics in 1938, you see that not much has changed since 776 BC. You see the same thing going on. So here are some of the quotes that I took from news articles that were written about the athletes in Berlin. So you hear the Olympic athletes competing in Berlin frequently focused on meat. Athletes regularly dined on 2 steaks per meal, sometimes poultry, averaged nearly a half a kilogram of meat daily. Pre-event meals consisted of 1 to 3 steak and eggs supplemented with meat juice extract. And then other athletes were stressing the importance of carbohydrate. The Olympic athletes from countries like England, Finland, and Holland were consuming porridge, and the athletes from Chile and Italy were feasting on pasta, and then the members of the Japanese team consumed 1 pound of rice daily. And so no change between 776 BC and 1938, and no change between 1938 and right now, right? So the same thing keeps going on. So for a very long time, athletes and coaches and people involved in the sports industry have been searching for the holy grail, the thing that makes the difference. And I think it's a lot of things that make a difference. It's not a single thing. The problem is that if you go back to 776 BC, or you're talking about 2019 right now, we see the same phenomenon, which is that the decisions that athletes and their coaches are making about what to eat are not really guided by evidence. And that's a truly unfortunate thing. You see a lot of storytelling. You see a lot of testimonials and advertising and that sort of thing. And often bad practices being passed down through generations of athletes, like people who played football and ate a terrible diet, or teaching other people who play football how to play football and eat a terrible diet. So we have everything going on but an analysis of the evidence. And one thing I'll tell you in analyzing the evidence, and this is just kind of a funny aside, I teach a course on sports nutrition through our school, and I taught it last year for the first time in January. It's a 12-week course, and by the way, that's part of my problem, is trying to take 24 hours of lecture and fit it into this format to give you an overview. But it was 24 hours of lecture and 24 hours of paper writing and research, and here's what we all concluded at the end, and I had some of my best students in this class. Athletes sometimes are so genetically gifted that they succeed in spite of the protein loading and the supplement taking and all the bad things they do to themselves. And really, the only thing that you can do other than eat well and train like crazy and hydrate, those are the big things, and we'll talk about those today, the things that really make a difference beyond that are all illegal. So you really, and the illegal stuff works great. I have to tell you, we did a lot of research on that. And if you're willing to do illegal things to promote sports performance, that's really where you get the most action. But if you're not going to do that, and you're going to play it straight, it is the food, it is the water, it is the exercise, all right? So I called this sports and exercise nutrition because, as I mentioned earlier, I think we want to appeal to people who are just working out for fitness. And that's most of us in this room. I'm 62 years old, and I don't expect to be recruited for a professional sports team. What I do expect to do is live to be 100 and some, in good shape, and have a great quality of life, and be able to do anything I want to do. I have an 89-year-old father who doesn't take any drugs, and lives on his own and can do anything he wants to do at the age of 89. So I want to have that, but I want to go beyond that. I found out, by the way, there's a guy in Chile who's claiming to be 137 years old, and I'm hoping they can verify it, because there weren't any birth certificates back when he was born. But if they can, that means I have like 75 more years, and wouldn't that be cool? Think how much trouble I can get into, and how many people I can make angry with 75 more years of this, right? So let's talk about the best diet for athletes. There are 3 macronutrients: carbohydrate, protein, and fat. And the first part of the misunderstanding is everybody thinks that protein is so important. It's the most important macronutrient. I'm going to show you and prove to you that it's not. But if you ask a coach or an athlete who's never been to a conference like this and goes to regular sports doctors and that sort of thing, they all say protein is the thing. Now, protein is important. It's important for everybody, including athletes. But the problem is that eating too much protein is dangerous and detrimental to your health. And that includes athletes as well. It's not limited to just the regular population. So what do athletes, and everybody in this room, for that matter, use for energy? Well, carbohydrate is the preferred source of energy, particularly during exercise. Humans are more efficient at converting carbohydrate to energy than anything else they can eat. The energy comes from two sources, plasma glucose, which is the breakdown product of carbohydrate, and glycogen, which is the storage form of glucose. The best carbohydrate foods to eat are starchy foods. Fruits and vegetables are good for you. You should eat a lot of them. The problem is that the calorie density is not enough to meet people's needs, whether you're exercising or not, by the way, because at 100 calories a pound for vegetables and 200 calories a pound for fruit, we'd all have to quit our jobs and stay home and eat full-time if we were going to meet our calorie needs just from fruits and vegetables. So starchy foods like potatoes and squash and rice and beans, those are all a very important part of the type of diet that people thrive on. And people actually like those foods. It's interesting. I've had people jump up out of the chair and hug me, like I can have a potato. I've fantasized about potatoes for years while everybody told me not to eat them. I'm going to go home and have one right now. So giving permission to eat potatoes is one of the great pleasures of my life in my office. You probably have heard of hitting the wall. Hitting the wall, how that works is this is when an athlete is running a marathon or doing something else that requires a lot of stamina and just runs out of fuel. And your performance becomes impaired, everything goes south. Sometimes it means you drop out of the competition or you can't play or you can't run. And this is because you've run out of ready glucose and you've used up your glycogen stores. You don't want that to happen. So taking in enough carbohydrate is important. And if you do it, here are the benefits. First of all, you have enough energy to meet your calorie needs, exercising or not. The second thing is you maintain glucose levels during training and competition. You preserve your glycogen stores. You promote more rapid recovery after exercise. You preserve the body's lean muscle mass. That's very important. The irony of the protein loading is in the process of protein loading to become big and muscular, athletes end up losing muscle mass because they don't have enough fuel and the body will take fuel from the lean mass. The storage form of glucose, by the way, is glycogen. And humans can store about 350 grams of carbohydrate, 1,400 calories in the form of muscle glycogen, and another 360 calories worth in the liver. There's a little bit circulating in the bloodstream. The larger the muscle mass, the bigger the athlete gets, the more glycogen he can store. But also, the bigger the athlete gets and the more muscle development, the more energy needed. So they kind of end up even though they can store more glycogen. Now, an interesting thing, and we're going to talk about hydration today, is in order to store glycogen, you have to be well hydrated. So you have to drink enough water. So for every gram of glycogen that you store, you take in 3 grams of water. And this is one of the things that can really help an endurance athlete, like if you're running a marathon. Anybody in here run marathons? I've done a few. So that will sustain you longer. So the well-hydrated athlete who's stored a lot of glycogen will last a lot longer in an endurance race than the poorly hydrated or dehydrated athlete will. Glucose is the main ingredient to create ATP, which is the energy source that provides energy to the cells. Now, tissues have limited storage capacity for ATP because it burns hot. So if you could store a lot of this stuff, you'd just catch fire and die. It doesn't work that way. So you have to constantly produce it. And that's why you need a steady source of glucose entering the bloodstream. And the glucose comes from carbohydrate. That's the only way you're going to get ready glucose is by eating carbohydrate. Glycolysis is the process by which ATP is produced through the conversion of glycogen back to glucose. Aerobic glycolysis is in the presence of oxygen. Anaerobic glycolysis is not with oxygen, it's without oxygen. Aerobic glycolysis produces more fuel than anaerobic glycolysis and also does so without producing lactic acid. So when we're talking about anaerobic exercise, we're talking about short sprints, we're talking about jumps, throwing something, shot put, that sort of thing. You can only do it for about 1.5 minutes or 2 minutes, and the reason is the lactic acid buildup in the muscle. And here's something interesting, and it goes to the hydration issue that I'm going to mention a lot of times during this talk. And that is that when you are well hydrated, you're dumping lactic acid into a larger pool of fluid because a significant percentage of your blood plasma is made of water. Dehydrated athletes run the risk of metabolic acidosis much more than hydrated athletes because of the smaller liquid volume of the blood. So another reason to promote drinking a lot of water. Now, the body has a lot of ways to meet energy needs. And if you refuse to eat enough carbohydrate and you insist on eating a paleo diet and you insist on eating a lot of protein, the body will just do compensatory things in order to keep your body operating. That doesn't always result in health, but the human will always be operating no matter what adjustments have to be made. So gluconeogenesis is the process of making glucose from a non-carbohydrate substance. It's an adaptive mechanism to make sure that you don't hit the wall when you're just walking around every day, let alone doing an exercise event. Low carbohydrate diets will deplete plasma glucose and eventually dry up your glycogen stores. So this forces the body to convert triglycerides and amino acids to a carbohydrate glucose type substance for fuel. And also can involve breaking down lean muscle mass for fuel. So again, the protein-loading athlete is doing so in the interest of building strong muscles. And while he's protein loading and not eating enough carbohydrate, his body is borrowing amino acids from his muscle stores in order to fuel the body. Doesn't that sound like a counterproductive strategy, right? Okay. And by the way, and we'll talk about this several times, this also increases the solute load on the kidneys because when you metabolize protein, lots of waste product that has to be detoxified, and your kidneys get charged with doing that.